Management of public space during COVID-19. I'm delighted to bring this to you this afternoon. We've got a really expert and I think very interesting panel that I will introduce you to shortly. But I think the first thing to say is that we're doing this in collaboration with Newcastle City Council, so really delighted to have their help and participation in this, as well as Northumbria Police. There are very nearly 140 of you, I think, taking part, including retailers, hoteliers, food and beverage and licensees, transport people. There are bus operators, next someone from the airport, lawyers, architects, there's a brewer, there's a tech company, at least one, theatres, surveyors, and I think we've got the People's Kitchen out there as well. So a really good cross-section. Thank you very much for joining us. Our objectives this afternoon are threefold. First of all, to help businesses understand the changes that they're likely to see, particularly concerning pedestrian, to the public realm in Newcastle city centre. Secondly, to provide guidance to businesses, particularly retailers who are likely to be amongst the earliest to reopen, about how to open safely and get your business premises ready, and also to understand the police's role in the city's recovery. I'll introduce our panelists in a second. The way that we will do this is I will be asking the questions. You will see that there's a Q&A facility. Please type your questions into that. And because we're recording it, the recording doesn't show the questions. So the panelists will answer the questions that I read rather than everything that automatically goes onto the Q&A feed. We've got an hour for this. We've got quite a lot to get through. Each of our panelists will give a short presentation and we'll give them or you some time for sort of some specific Q&A after that. And then I hope we'll manage some more general Q&A towards the end. So our function this afternoon is to help you get open in the short term. There may be more strategic questions that some of you would like to know about. We won't be getting to those. This is about short term. What do you need to know now for the immediate coming weeks and months? Our panelists then, if I just quickly introduce them, Graham Grant, who is the council's head of transport. He's been with the council since 2008 and has been heavily involved in transport strategy since he joined, and he's a really expert person on all matters transport. And Graham, we're delighted to have you. Lizzie Orde, who is the council's primary authority on environmental health. She has been working in that field for 25 years and works particularly closely, for example, with Greggs, Into, Virgin Money and World Duty Free, to mention just a few. So she is absolutely superb at giving advice for businesses looking to reopen. And Steve Wicks from Northumbria Police, who has been with the police service for over 14 years. He's been the city centre commander for the last 3.5 years, with a particular focus and responsibility on the day and nighttime economy and licensing lead. And he will be explaining the police's role in the city's recovery. So without further ado, we'll go, Graham, across to you and go for some specific question and answer after that. So Graham, thank you very much. You have the microphone.
Well, hello all, and thank you very much for coming. I'm just trying to work out how this works. Hopefully now you should all be able to see my screen. What I wanted to say first off is that while the crisis phase of COVID-19 within the city continues to be managed in terms of us delivering food parcels and various other things, now the council is very actively looking forward towards the recovery of the city and how to support businesses and people as we look to start to recover and restart our city. Our response put forward to the city while following government guidance, and a little more on this later, on social distancing. The local authority is responsible for implementing this, and we will lead the way, but it is really important that we've got the likes of Northumbria Police and NE1 centre. Now, a shift in transport is key to this recovery process, especially as the way in which people travel will change post-COVID-19. There are several elements to consider. Bus companies are going to be struggling due to government conditions on how many people can use their services, and if too many people get into cars, it will add to congestion. This would lead to there being too many buses arriving at a single point in time, and that will compound issues in terms of queuing and space available in the city centre. So managing the demand is going to be more important than ever, and particularly more than building capacity for it. Because of the way that people have changed their travel since staying at home, it's led to an improvement in air quality and an increase in sustainable travel, such as the use of bicycles and things like that. This is something that does need to continue so that we can create a better city for everyone, and it's really important that people understand the scale of the challenge, which I can go on to later. But there used to be around 500,000 journeys taken on public transport every day, and because of the and that's in Tyne and Weir. And because of the restrictions the government have placed on public transport providers, that means that their capacity is only going to be at about 20%. So you're looking at 400,000 journeys that would have to be taken by other means. And even if you're taking into account an economic downturn and a significant increase in the numbers of people working from home, you're still looking at around, if you were to half the numbers, that's about 200,000 journeys every day. And for comparison, the Tyne Bridge used to carry somewhere between 60 and 70,000 vehicles across it every day. Now, we've done a great deal of work around the city, and we're suggesting a series of initiatives that I'll move on to explaining now. But what we're trying to do, and if you can see my screen, hopefully you should be able to see this, we're trying to implement immediate measures to enable social distancing, such as the reallocation of roads, stabilise the economy and society while protecting the environment, and continue to adapt and improve on the measures we put in place to deliver a change to our transport system that benefits the vision for our city. In the city centre, we're looking across the entire city at the moment. What I'm going to focus on is in the city centre, but if people want to ask us questions about residential neighbourhoods or district shopping centres, we'd be happy to answer them. The city centre is a key focus for us because not only is it the heart of our economy, but it is also the single geographical location where the most trips start or end. But equally, we do need to intervene in places like residential areas because that's where all trips start or end. That map that hopefully you'll be able to see now shows the streets that we're currently working on. We've got our design engineers looking at over 40 streets in the city centre in the first instance in terms of looking to reallocate road space. We've been mapping all of them to understand the width of pavements, where street furniture is located, where lights are located, and so on and so forth. And we're going to be moving through the city centre making interventions based on a phased approach. We can't do to phase our interventions. What you can see there in terms of the pink colouring is our phase one. The first streets that we're going to see interventions on will be Queen Victoria Road and St Thomas's Street, which are in the proximity of the RVI. And then we'll be moving on to other streets in the city centre. We are also looking at future licensing alterations, but I think that would be subject to another webinar in due course. The council member with the lead for that, cabinet member, Councillor Nick Kemp, is really keen on trying to engage with businesses to understand what we can or can't do legally, and we're working with the police to try and look at whether or not licensing can be provided in different areas. And as part of our design, we're trying to be flexible in terms of the space so that we can make sure that there are opportunities for people. On non-pedestrianised city centre streets, we're going to propose to make one-way systems on pavements. That'll become commonplace, whereas Northumberland Street, obviously being pedestrianised, will be quite different. As an example, what we've done across the entire city centre is look at the widths that we have available to us and do a red, amber, green kind of rating of them to look at whether or not there is sufficient space on our pavements at the moment for people to be able to move past one another. And in particular, I think what we're aiming for is a recognition that we have to have pavements that are a minimum of 4 metres wide, 2 metres to provide queuing for shops and retailers and so on, and 2 metres to provide passage for people. Now, in many instances, we're in a situation where our pavements aren't wide enough. So that red, amber, green analysis that we've done across the city centre is about making sure that we understand where we're going to have to encroach on road space to try and provide it. Another thing that I'd like to bring to your attention is the signage that's being produced on the right. This is the kind of signage that government has approved for our use. And I think that while you may see some of this in the short term, We're deeply concerned about the types of messages this shows in the longer term, bearing in mind social distancing will be in place for a number of months, if not at least a year. So what we're trying to think about is how we ensure that the design of the new city centre doesn't reflect what could be perceived as being quite dystopian and authoritarian, but while also making sure people understand what is desired and requested of them. And in particular, one of the things that we need to recognise and discuss is that retailers will have their own responsibility for managing queues into and out of their facilities. We will be supporting with that. In the short term, what we're looking at is going to be introducing directional markers similar to what you see there. We'll be refining them, and we're really looking forward to your feedback on how you think that they work. But we're having, north, south, east, and west directional markers. It may be that we start to reduce them, but what we didn't want to do is to just go for really black and white or very temporary looking interventions. And then also queue markers that you can see there in terms of us spacing them 2 meters away from enabled for queues. What we're going to be doing in the first instance is using the information that NE1's provided us about where shops are already open to start going to put them down, probably from the back end of next week, if not the week after. That's the end of the slides that I have for you. I do have other things that I can use to support questions, but I thought rather than boring people with a slideshow that I should take questions and then try to expand on what we're going to be doing through them.
Graham, thank you very much indeed. We'll give people the opportunity to ask you some questions now, but if I can just start with a couple of questions, just as people are thinking about what they want to ask you and typing it up. And these are linked questions. They both relate to more vulnerable people who have a little bit more difficulty getting around. So the first is, and I'll ask them both together. Can we investigate the feasibility of delivering more car parking spaces to cater for our vulnerable people, including the disabled or older people, perhaps with flexibility, perhaps at the weekends, of using some corporate car parks that are not being used, including electric park and ride buggies? And a second related question says, I note the proposal regarding considering the temporary removal of street furniture, such as seating, for a period of time, is being considered to facilitate social distancing, to discourage people spending unnecessarily long periods of time in one place. But has consideration been given as to how this could impact vulnerable people, elderly, parents with young people, especially when they may be waiting in a queue to get to the shops for a long period of time? Could you, perhaps if you could answer those to begin with, Graham, and then I can see that there are questions coming through on the feed.
In terms of that, addressing the last question first, the intention is to remove street furniture where we feel it's necessary, and we think it is important to do so in the first instance to create ourselves as much space as we can. We will then put it back in place, but in the most appropriate locations to try and help with the movement of people around the city. So for example, taking it a different way, one of the retailers in the city centre had been in touch and noted that the proximity of a bench to their shop meant that queuing wasn't really working. So we've gone in to take that out. We'll reassess where it could be and put it back in place in due course. So we are mindful of that. We're also mindful of the fact that lockdown may be progressively relaxed based on different people and different demographics and circumstances. And many of the people who you're referring to in terms of those with mobility concerns may be limiting their own journeys to begin with. And I think that what we're doing is we just want to create the space in the city as far as we can, look at how we're going to use it, and then put the seating back in place instead of just assuming that a seat that was placed maybe 10 or 15 years ago should stay in the same location. We've got a similar issue with things like phone boxes, because some of people will have noticed that you see phone boxes or digital advertising screens effectively now just springing up on our pavements, and that's because up until the back end of last year there wasn't really a great deal of regulation that we as a council could do to limit where they were being put in place. And now often we've got situations whereby these things block pavement, so we are looking at whether or not we have the opportunity to take them out temporarily. In terms of parking, again, I think one of the things it is important to note, I could just share this because this is something that I've prepared in terms of, I've got some additional slides. If people can see that there are a lot of car parking spaces in Newcastle City Centre, so there's 10,000 public and there's about 10,000 private non-residential in Newcastle City Centre, and they are not at capacity every day. So in the first instance, there is quite a lot of capacity in parking facilities already. I think what we will have to do, though, is just recognise that we need to work with the likes of NE1 and businesses to identify where we need to improve in the coming weeks and months and try to move parking around to cater for people and what they need to do. But in the first instance, we'll try to sweat the asset that we've got in terms of parking and make sure that we're directing people towards the most appropriate location first before looking at adding any significant additional parking.
Okay, Graham, thank you. There are a number of questions beginning to come through now. So if we just go from the top, what are the plans for Granger Street?
Well, we're still working on the plans for Granger Street, I think is the clearest thing to say. We've prioritised different streets, as I was showing earlier on. And so at the moment, in terms of Granger Street, that's in our second phase of delivery. At the moment, we'll be doing the evidence gathering around the Wicks there. But one of the things that we've already had brief conversations with the bus operators about is to recognise that the pavements there are unlikely to be able to facilitate queuing for shops, movement of people, and queuing for buses, and it's a major bus, location on Granger Street as well. So we're gonna have to look at that, and it may well be that we have to remove lanes of traffic or the ability for buses to pull off the road in order to stop to get people on and off the bus. But that's just what we're going to have to do to create the amount of space that's needed for people walking in and around the city centre. In terms of that and how we tell people what we're going to be doing, what our intention is for every week to release the plans on about Friday about what will be happening in the week after. So today we're releasing the fact that Queen Victoria Road and St Thomas's Street will have interventions next week, and then during next week we'll start socialising and showing the draft plans for what we're going to do the following week to nearby businesses and engage with them about that and then go and put them in. But part of this will be about the fact that we're going to be planning, doing and reviewing all at the same time based on different streets, and we're just going to have to keep the dialogue going with businesses to understand what you need.
Thanks, Graham. There's a question about the quayside, which I think the answer you've just given includes that one. There's a question about bicycles and storage of bicycles. Are there recommendations for how that might be improved up really from around that? Can you say anything about that?
We are going to put in place additional cycle parking. We're trying to identify the exact locations at the moment. We've got a few different options, and as soon as we know exactly where we'll be putting it in, we'll let people know. I wouldn't want to mislead them in terms of saying it's going to go here when we don't know. We will be putting some more in, and probably in 2 or 3 locations across the city centre. The other thing that we're going to be doing is also trying to advertise the amount of space that is already available, because we've got a huge amount of cycle parking space available, and we're working with colleagues about whether or not we can create temporary safe accommodation, indoors for bikes, and while trying to invest in a new cycle interchange, as it were, to enable people to have safe opportunities for changing and things like that.
I think there's going to be, I think we're certain that there is going to need to be some external queuing. So there's a question about that, and will there be a maximum number of people allowed in a queue, or how might that be managed?
The problem with that, Adrian, is that every store is different, and so, for example, if you're looking at Fenwick, they've got quite a lot of storefront to be able to queue people alongside, and they've got storefronts in various different locations, but just a couple of doors up, the same opportunity isn't true. Northumberland Street in particular, that's part of the reason for taking out the street furniture in the first instance, is that we need to try and maximize the opportunity for queuing and for movement. I think what we're going to have to do, just as retailers are going to be doing, is learning as we go and trying to be flexible in terms of correcting things if we think that they're not working. So in terms of whether or not there'll be a maximum number of people in a queue, I think it'll have to depend on the location, but we're all aware of the pictures that people have probably seen around what happened when Five Guys opened on Northumberland Street, and there was a queue about 250 metres up Northumberland Street. I think we as a city are going to have to think about how we manage this moving forward and continue to communicate with each other about the best way to do it. I should also add, though, that one of the things that we're really keen to do is to recognise it's not just about physical infrastructure changes. So one of the things that we're planning is to create almost city hosts, whereby people there won't be enforcement led and there won't be police led. It's about us all working together, but to try and explain and help people understand how to move through the city centre, what to do if the queue's already too large, and things like that. And so we'll be putting city hosts in place as well in the coming weeks.
I think it's also just worth reminding people that NE1's retail core manager, Mark Sumner, is very easy to get hold of. And so where businesses do think that they are going to have a requirement for external queuing, please let Mark know that, and he will help coordinate that with your neighbouring premises, and also with the folk at the council. Graham, there's a question about park and ride. We understand the council are looking at park and ride sites immediately outside the city centre. How far has that progressed, and what form of transport is assumed from those sites to access the city centre?
Well, we're working with Nexus on park and ride, and also giving consideration to other things. People will note that our existing park and ride site is being turned into a temporary testing facility as well up at Newcastle Great Park, so that limits the opportunities to use that park and ride site. That said, we're looking at various different locations, and one of the things that is really important to understand is that a lot of people who live in Newcastle live within about a 30-minute walk of the city centre anyway. So what we really need to try and do is to maximise the opportunity for those who live in Newcastle to think about taking different ways of getting into work in the city centre. And also the other thing to bear in mind is just to change the hours that people are accessing it, because what everybody on this call would recognise is that our transport network deals very well for a lot of the time, but it doesn't at peak hours, and that's because everybody's travelling at the same time. If we can try and influence that, it means that our system will work a lot better. And that means that some of the issues that you've got in terms of metro and public transport access, you know, there'll be more opportunity for people to use them if they need to, particularly if those who don't need to can take other ways of getting in and around the city.
Graham, thank you. There's a very good question actually about blind people getting around. So they say nice stickers. However, what about blind people? Would they have a Wi-Fi signal or voice activation? I'm not sure voice activation about what, but I guess it's early days for this. But what are your thoughts, Graham?
Well, there is a system that we can roll out, but not within a matter of weeks, whereby you can put in a guidance system for people with visual impairments into lampposts and things like that. This is, I mean, as retailers would obviously want their queuing to be right outside their property and against the shop front. But in terms of inclusive design, that's where we should be designing the movement channels, because that's where people with visual impairments will be more used to walking, and they'll have existing guidance on the pavements that are there, you know, in terms of the bobbles that you see on the pavements. That's there to guide them up and down streets, and they're generally next to the building. So it's one of the things that we're continuing to work through, and we'll be working with the existing cities and disability forum to look at how effective some of these measures are being and where we can make changes.
Thanks, Graham. I'll ask the next two together because I think they are related. The bus stops outside the Market House student accommodation on Market Street will cause major issues for the access of residents and staff whilst maintaining social distancing. Is there a plan to relocate bus stops to better places? That's the first question. And the second one is, will there be stricter enforcement of unofficial taxi ranks, for example, on Dean Street? And really, I guess that that is about busyness of public spaces, isn't it, with other people's infrastructure, or not other people's, but necessary infrastructure.
The first step is for us to widen pavements, because at the moment, you know, you can't go and put bus stops into other locations where the pavements are too narrow to to facilitate them being there and also then people being able to move. So our first step across all of those areas that you can see is creating sufficient space on pavements for us to consider doing these things. The other thing that we will be doing is working with the bus operators around learning from the experience of what's happening at, as things move forward. And it may be that we have to work together to move some bus stops to different locations. We're going to have to be flexible on doing that. And I think the bus operators will work with us on that, just as they have been working with us throughout the development of plans, but also just in terms of, our future vision for what we want the city to be.
Graham, there's a question about loading. So are there any short-term plans to change any of the city centre delivery, loading, unloading restrictions?
Yes, and to take the other question into account in terms of enforcement around certain areas of taxi licensing as well, we are likely to roll out new enforcement restrictions around the city centre called red routes. What that means is that there'll be red lines instead of yellow lines down on the side of the road, but it means that when you're narrowing the amount of space available for vehicles, it means that we can actually enforce against people stopping on them to make sure that people can move through them. That will enable us to add flexibility in terms of our curb space for loading, which currently isn't there. So for example, you could create a situation whereby currently there's no loading allowed because there'd all be bus stops or something, but if you turn it into a red route, then there's the opportunity for us to think about providing loading at certain hours when buses aren't using it. Furthermore, one of the areas we will be thinking about short-term changes to loading is on Northumberland Street. There are only 5 properties on Northumberland Street that don't have rear loading. And because of those 5 and the existence of the traders on Northumberland Street, we need to keep access open to Northumberland Street. And I think that given the amount of footfall we're going to have down there and the requirement for queuing, we're going to be trying to work with those businesses and the traders, the street traders, to work out how we can try to change or flex on the delivery hours to make sure that there aren't vehicles blocking space on Northumberland Street, which will be needed by people on foot.
Thank you. We'll try and take 2 more questions, and then Lizzie, I'm going to come across to you, and I'm hoping that there will be time at the end for some more general questions. Graham, there's a question about, and I know you did touch on this earlier, but this is about expanding on the provision for bars and restaurants to have opportunities to trade externally, which may not be covered by existing licenses. Can you just say something about that? I know there's an aspiration to get to enable better social distancing by using external spaces. I think people would like a little bit more insight into how that might work.
I think we will have to come back to it. We're working with the police and others about how we might do it, but I think that what we're trying to do is to think about temporary licensing of open spaces as opposed to changing existing licenses, so that we can try to do it on larger areas of the city centre. So you could try to say, take for example Grey Street, you could look at whether or not you could provide temporary licenses around some of the new space that we create in Grey Street so that businesses can spill out. What we will have to do is just to react to the additional space that we're creating through the road space reallocation to work out how the best way of that working will be, and engage with businesses about when their loading needs to take place and where they need different types of space. But we are really, really keen to ensure that we're flexible and work with businesses to make sure that they can recover as quickly as possible. And furthermore, I think one of the things that we're really keen to understand, and particularly why we want to try and be a bit more creative about our uses of space, is that it's clear that many people won't be travelling abroad in the same numbers for a long time, but equally we do think that there'll be a progressive relaxation in terms of how people travel around the country. And it's very important, therefore, that we as Newcastle and the Northeast try to capitalise and make sure that people decide to come and visit here, for whatever reason, because they feel safe and that there are opportunities for them to enjoy themselves. And it's really important, and we will be working with businesses and traders to make sure that we're leading the way on that.
Brilliant, Graham. Thank you. I'm going to try my hardest to keep to time. So Graham's not going yet, but Lizzie, please can we come across now to you for guidance on businesses and considerations around helping them open safely. Lizzie, thank you.
Hi everyone, hope you're well. I think the most important message today is that we and the government want to stop the spread of the virus and not to stop businesses trading. We're very keen on this from an enforcement point of view. We are here to help. This is new to us all, and we do need to look at how you can operate your businesses safely, both for your staff and customers. And we do need to encourage customers to feel safe to come out and shop and be in the city centre. When you're asking questions, there's no silly questions. You should have heard what we've been going through lately. It's a learning curve for us all. A few quick points. When you return to your business, we have put some guidance out, but there are some critical things prior if your business has been shut for some time and people not in there. Looking at Legionella and hot and cold water systems, the minimum would be to flush them all through without producing aerosols. For anyone out there with leisure centres, hospitalities, higher risk swimming pools, showers, they will need further more complex actions. All the information on that on the HSE website. You need to look at deep cleaning, check for pest issues, check your stock, fridge, temperatures, review your safer food, better business packs. Quick one on fire safety, just make sure your fire alarms are working. You may need to look at redoing your fire risk assessment if you change layout of your premises. Gas safety checks, they all still need to be done. Again, there's some allowances from the government and from HSE that if you can't get people in to inspect your coffee machines, pressure systems, as long as you can ensure they're safe, you can carry on using those. When we come back to you actually beginning to trade, you do need to carry out a COVID-19 risk assessment to make your business COVID-19 secure. I know at this point you'll all think risk assessments, and it does seem like a minefield. It's not about paperwork. It's looking at what measures you can reasonably implement. You don't need a safety consultant to do this. For many businesses, it's very simple, a one-page document, depending on the complexity of your business. There's a lot of help out there. I think some information's been sent out with this and is going to be on the Newcastle City Council website, and there will be links available. There's some great guidance on carrying your risk assessment and a template available for you. There's some specific guidance for businesses such as working safely with COVID-19 in shops and branches. It's a very thorough document. You can take that and use that to produce your own risk assessment. Remember, the 2-metre social distancing rule is just guidance. It's only where possible and where reasonable in a commercial premises. You can still trade safely without that by implementing the other control measures, such as barriers, screens. You could change the layout, one-way systems. But do remember, you'll need to think about staff areas, locker areas, and canteens. I've been working with some of my businesses, such as Greg's and others who have opened, and they found it really beneficial to have staff in for a couple of days prior to you actually going live and opening. You can run through your risk assessments with them, look at control measures, and get feedback from them. We found role plays very useful where staff can go around and see. They also become more comfortable, and that should highlight any problems with queues or how to keep, or whether they feel they need more distancing or more measures. PPE, we've all heard a lot about PPE. There's no legal requirement to provide any PPE for COVID-19. Generally, by implementing other control measures, you shouldn't need it. However, again, in the businesses we've dealt with, we've found that staff have actually felt more secure with some sort of face covering. Surprisingly, when given the option of masks or shields, most staff have gone for shields. They're quite simple, they're quite cheap, and you can provide them. They don't need to be provided for each person as long as you can clean and disinfect them in between use. You can get face coverings, masks that are washable, and hand them to staff and get them to take them home and wash them. so it's not a daily thing. Gloves are not very beneficial to this unless you're directly handling money. Where possible, the big issue is getting staff being encouraged to wash their hands frequently and more often and use hand sanitizer where that's not possible. External queuing you've heard a lot about. It is a business responsibility to look at their queue and manage their queue. But as you've heard, there's a lot of help out there for you, and you will need to look at the outside areas. You'll need to be looking at your businesses next door and working with them, or the shopping centres. But again, you can only do what's reasonable. That was it, really. I mean, we're here for help and advice. There's a lot of guidance out there, and we're trying to help you trade safely to reassure your staff and customers, as we want you all to prosper.
Lizzie, thanks very much indeed. We'll go to questions. There's two that have been, I can see on the feed already, and there's one that we had earlier. So I'm going to start with that one, and I'll just read it out. It says, our question concerns the practice of acupuncture as restrictions are lifted. Can you give some pointers and how soon could we reasonably restart the business? And I think that might go more widely actually into salons. I can think of hairdressers and barbers that all need to think about that. So any thoughts on that, Lizzie, please?
Unfortunately, the COVID regs for business closures actually state beauty treatments, tattooists, hairdressers as a business that must remain closed. We've got no discretion on this. We're all hoping they'll be open again soon, and I do understand they're a one-to-one business, so we're not having the same social distancing with other people, but you have got close contact. We're just the same as everyone. We're just waiting for government to announce when these may be relaxed and these businesses can open.
Okay, thank you. We'll take the next two questions together because I think you'd probably be able to link them. Will the plan of action for the city centre and scheduled works be changed? Should the UK advice of 2 metres be altered to match apparently the World Health Organization guidance of 1 metre? And perhaps that's not a million miles away from how do you social distance following a fire alarm evacuation?
There has been talk about this. If the guidance change, like I say, the HSE guidance is 1 metre for within business premises anyway. It's more, if you can, it's better to use the 2 metre than any PPE or other methods. Fitness industry. For your fire safety, if you have to get out in a fire, at that point, that's going to become the main risk to anybody. And I know I've had discussions with Town and Weir Fire. They also are producing a lot of guidance on their website. And at that point, you probably have fewer staff and fewer customers anyway. At that point, we wouldn't be looking at social distancing.
Lizzie, thank you. This is a question from the fitness industry. And is there any fitness industry specific guidance in relation to social distancing that this possibly be different to standard social distancing?
There isn't. We are working. We were looking at what's happening across Europe in gyms opening, and you may have seen what's happening there. We are trying to put together some consistent guidance with the leisure industry and looking at how that may happen. Okay,
thank you. We'll take just a couple more questions, and then Steve, we'll come to you. Where would a premises find guidance on the number of people that they're allowed inside their store?
There's no set guidance, and it depends on the layout and the complexity. What we found is your supermarkets maybe close one till in between, so you only have every other till open. But then some are now opening every till, but having barriers between, so you can actually get more people. So there's no standard guidance on how many people you can have in the store. It's something you would have to look at knowing how much browsing time people need or how people flow. You could perhaps do the one-way system if your premises is big enough, but there's no standard guidance on that.
Okay, thank you. There was also a question about fire escape routes, which is gone, but we'll answer it anyway. Can fire escape routes be used as exit routes in shared buildings?
You would have to, we don't look after fire safety. It would be Town Away of Fire and Safety you would have to answer that question. I wouldn't like to say yes or no. It would depend on the individual circumstances and your fire risk assessment. Okay,
and I think I'm just looking at the time. I think we're still sort of according to my my schedule. So, this might help families that are all social distancing at the moment. Can 2 people from the same group or household be allowed in? And I guess we're talking about a store, or is it 1 in, 1 out? The preferred way of handling that?
It is up to each and every store. We're very aware that sometimes parents can't leave children behind, or you may have an elderly person that needs help. Most stores are being very pragmatic about this. And I'm just reminding you, when you're taking other people in, you're responsible for them to ensure social distancing.
Okay, Lizzie, thank you. I hope there'll be some time for more general questions. Steve, we're going to come across to you now, please. So thank you very much indeed. And you're going to tell us about the police's role in the city centre during COVID-19. Steve.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining this webinar. I clearly have some people who know me on this webinar because I've already had text messages taking the mick out of me for eating a chocolate bar, which I clearly hadn't taken account of. So I'm going to try and behave. Right, really challenging times for the city and the police role in order to sort of answer that question, I suppose, is to be as supportive as possible. We absolutely will be supporting the recovery design, we'll be supporting recovery implementation, and we'll be supporting all of you as much as we possibly can. Some of that support will include providing expert advice to our partners in the local authority and to yourselves as businesses in respect of things like the creation of crowded places, queuing systems, to ensure that we're mitigating all and every threat, including that of COVID. So as we redesign our city, or as we are part of supporting the redesign of the city, we will be constantly making sure that is a safe structure in all respects. I suppose more importantly, or not more importantly, but probably more prevalently to those of you listening in here, we'll absolutely be providing a tasked police presence to the city. Graham very kindly mentioned that the support of the sort of city hosts is not going to be a police function. So we don't police social distancing, contrary to what you may have seen in some national media reporting as policing tried to get to grips with the emergency legislation. We won't be entering into the city to police where somebody stands or how far away somebody is from someone else, or how well a business is doing in terms of providing and supporting social distancing. Clearly there are thresholds over which we will step in and do something from an enforcement perspective. But I'm really keen to make sure that we are part of a very welcoming team as people start to return to the city to visit your business premises. They're not going to be met with heavy enforcement from us unless it's required. And I suppose that takes me on to the next bit of the policing role, where we see the return of the vast majority of our incredibly well-behaved community to the city. We will unfortunately see, as is realistic, a return of criminality and antisocial behaviour. It would be unrealistic to suggest that we won't. What we're keen to do is take advantage of the fact that we're starting, arguably in some respects, from a clean slate with lots of these areas of business from policing perspective. So we will be as robust as possible with anyone coming into the city seeking to take advantage of those people returning or seeking to cause trouble. And that will require us to respond really quite dynamically, to be fair, because the city's going to look different to us as it will to all of you and to all of your customers. So where we are used to seeing problems, that those areas may be different. How we respond to those problems may have to be different, of course. And so we'll be really dynamic. We'll be consistently reviewing our patrols, our tasking and our support on a weekly, if not daily basis, to make sure that that is reflective of what you need and what is presenting itself to us. We're clearly working really closely with the local authority to ensure that all of those plans are joined up. I know that many of you will have concerns about particular elements of criminality, and whether that be the sort of street community issues that we see presenting themselves, or whether that be on-street drug use or serious violence. And please be reassured that we haven't withdrawn any resource from the city during this pandemic, because we recognise the need to protect vacant premises and support the city more widely. But as we reopen and restart, if anything, we will put even more resource in to ensure that we're able to protect you all and support the recovery effort. I didn't have a script. I just had a couple of little notes here. I don't have anything else to share with you. I certainly don't have a presentation because I'm winging this on an iPhone because our systems don't allow us access to Zoom. So I'm absolutely happy to take as many or as few questions as people have.
Steve, thank you very much indeed. We'll go back now to general questions. And actually, I thought there was one very good one, which actually I'm going to try and remember, but it looks like it's gone down, which actually I thought cut across quite nicely. It sort of cut across, Steve, your area, and also Graham, yours. And really, it was a question about, you know, the sort of the maximum capacity that the city can hold, and how do we figure out if a particular street has got too many people, and what do we then do about that? Steve, perhaps if you might like to think about that first, and then can we ask Graham if he can contribute as well?
Of course, I mean, a very short answer from me. We're very well versed in assessing capacity and crowd flow. We do it regularly with policing of events. We do that regularly in partnership with the local authority. Graham will know, as I do, that there are various algorithms and bits of maths that you can do to ensure that an area has a particular capacity. So part of the, when I talk about providing expert advice to the design teams and the infrastructure teams, that will absolutely be part of it. And that will be reviewed lifetime on the ground, as it is during an event, if you like. So as we see, you know, emerging crowded places looking maybe busier than we expected, we'll be able to, well, not intervene, but we'll be able to provide advice on the ground and support that.
Thank you. Graham, is there anything, do you want to add to that?
Just to kind of add to that, I think Steve and I are putting in place a process that means that when we're redesigning how the streets may look, that we'll make sure we're reviewing them across the local authority and the police to determine whether or not that leaves other threat, crime, and design in safety for people, whereby you're putting in place a new means of people using the space, which might mean that you get, you know, spaces where there are 100 people queuing, whereas normally you didn't have any. And so we are trying to work through a process that enables us to look at that. In addition, to also answer that, we're working with the National Institute for Data, which is based on the Helix and the Urban Observatory at Newcastle University, who've been monitoring our city centre streets throughout this period, so that we can have almost a real-time understanding as to how people are coming back into the area, how many people, what they're doing, where they're using it, and so on. And then also try to use that, recognizing that we're all doing this in real time as we're moving forward, trying to use that data to supplement the on-the-ground analysis that the likes of the police, the NE1 Rangers, and also City Council and the hosts who are referred to. So the idea is that we create this means of people telling us about issues that are happening, us being able to review them and make changes to the design of the space as we go. But that means that people need to understand that the first interventions that they see in our city centre or our city may not be the same things that are there 3 months from now or 6 months from now, as we continue to try and refine it. And what we're trying to do as a local authority and with our partners is not spend a huge amount of money early on for stuff that makes it more difficult for us to be flexible in terms of changing that design. We want to put stuff in as quickly as we can and as safely as we can review whether or not it's effective before we then make them semi-permanent so that it makes the city a more attractive place.
Okay, thank you. There's a question about social distancing, which I think is quite specific. If there's time, and there is also a question about universities and students I'm very keen to get to, but Lizzie, there's a question I know from a restaurateur asking if you can confirm what you said earlier about physical distancing, because the HSE website apparently seems to refer to 2 meters, as opposed, I think, to 1 meter. There may be some conflicting around that.
If you look at the HSE templates and their COVID-19 risk assessments, we do understand that 2 meters will not be possible for places such as kitchens a lot of the time. So they've said recommended down to 1. We're not saying don't try for 2, but it is not going to be feasible and you can't run a business like that. And that's when you be working back to back or on either sides, not facing each other and putting barriers in place. So that's where the 1 meter, it's just to make people aware that 2 meters is not law where possible. That's all.
Brilliant. Okay, Lizzie, thank you very much indeed. The question about students, which I thought was a very good one. How effective will policing be for students, and in particular international students who may not understand the guidance, and they have a huge and very important presence within the city?
Sorry, was that how effective will policing be, Adrian?
Yes.
Yeah, brilliant.
I have, Steve, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. No, just to make sure it was for me. Yeah, clearly we highly value our student population. They are a large percentage of the population within the smaller city centre, if you like. We've done an awful lot of work with our community engagement teams and with partners across the community to ensure that our entire demographic can understand the regulations. An example, which is a little bit off topic, we spent a significant amount of time having material translated for the Romanian community in the west end of Newcastle because we were struggling to explain things to them. As our students start to return, and in particular the international students, we'll absolutely be ensuring that we have material and communication methods which are appropriately either translated or communicated for them to ensure that they do understand what is happening. We have weekly meetings with universities, and we have 2 embedded police officers with the universities full-time who are having ongoing discussions around what our 2 universities plan to do, but in respect of student accommodation, in respect of student education with lectures, and then of course whether or not we will see any sort of Freshers' Week in terms of use of the nighttime economy at some point, whenever that may or may not be. And throughout that, we'll be ensuring that all of the student population are appropriately supported and communicated with, and for those international ones, that will be of a particular focus to us. So I hope the answer to that is that it will be very effective. We have excellent relationships with the universities, and we work really, really closely with them across their entire business sector. So I think I'm really comfortable that we'll be getting that right, but welcome feedback, of course.
Thanks, Steve. I'm going to link 2 more questions, which I'll read out. So, how are NE1 postcode and city centre residents being involved in this decision making, and have city councillors, and in particular the NCC Monument Councillor, have they been involved? And I think the related question is, when is it expected that these plans will be put in place? I think, Graham, that might be one for you first, please, or for you.
So we have briefed the Newcastle City Council Monument Councillors, or 2 of the 3 of them. The third one is actually, I think he's a paramedic, so he wasn't able to attend because he has other duties that he was involved in. Now, we have briefed them, and we will be involving residents, particularly in terms of trying to gain insight as to how the measures are working. If we sought approval from everybody about what we're going to do, we wouldn't get anything in place in time. So there is going to have to be an ongoing conversation around this, whereby we implement things when we can and with engagement where we can, but then refine them through engagement thereafter. taking, for example, and linking it to when will these things take place, the first measures that we're going to put in place in terms of physical changes on the ground will be on Queen Victoria Road next to the RVI, and on St Thomas's Street that leads down towards the bus stations from there. We'll be engaging on the designs for those schemes with Newcastle University and the RVI as major stakeholders in the area, so that they understand what we're doing. And it may be that we tweak the designs after conversation with them, but potentially even after we've also put it in on the ground. With other things that we're putting into place, it'll be on a phased basis. So every week we'll release information about what we're doing the following week. So that's what we're saying that we're doing next week, is those changes there. But we're also going to be changing the signal timings. So on every pedestrian we're able to within the next week, we're going to change the ability for pedestrians to cross over. So whereas they might only have one opportunity to cross the road in every minute or 2 minutes now, we're going to double the amount of opportunity that there is for people to be able to cross the road, to limit the amount of queuing that takes place when people are waiting for the green man to come on crossings, by putting stickers on the poles of all of the crossings saying that we've doubled the amount of time that's available for people. That'll again be on a rolling programme, and we'll probably take that outside of the city centre in due course.
I thought when we came to the general questions, Graham, that you would be the most popular panelist, and it is certainly proving to be the case, I think. I know you're talking about or our focus is the city centre, but actually there's a question from the Ousburn, which is, have any measures been identified for the Ousburn yet? And I guess that would also follow for any businesses that may be watching from Gosforth or Jesmond. So really on the wider city centre.
In terms of that, we're going to try to roll out into district centres the same principle that people see in the city centre, but we're focusing on the city centre first. That said, there may be changes in terms of how we take into account the different demographics in terms of who lives where in the city and how they use the different spaces. But our intention would be to take the lessons that we're learning in the city centre and take them out to district centres in the first instance, and also to recognise that we're going to need to make changes to the corridors and our road network running into the city centre to make sure that we can protect bus journey time reliability and create safer space for people walking and cycling. So we're going to be making those changes again. In residential areas, including the Ousburn, and recognising that the city centre is a residential area, we'll be trying to take the principle that we've been working towards in the city centre for a long time, which is that you can drive to anything that you want, just not through, and take that same approach in terms of low traffic neighbourhoods across the city. The principle of that being that it's the most cost-effective way of creating a city-wide network of safe walking and cycling routes that people can use, which also makes people more likely to use walking, cycling, or potentially even e-scooters if we're able to introduce them in and around the city's network, and makes it more likely that they'll use them for longer trips as well.
Thank you. I know we're getting up to time, so I'm just going to take 2 more questions. I think, Lizzie, I think this might be one for you. Has the council managed to secure any preferred suppliers for screens, signage, and possibly also with discounts that might be able to be passed on to officers or charities or other premises opening up in the city?
I think the details I got from NE1 on the guidance note that came out, actually you found the preferred people who are doing the signage. Of course, you can make your own and just laminate them depending on what you need for your business. There is no standard signage in law yet.
Thank you. And I mean, I think there is plenty of choice, and obviously, you know, it's up to people to choose, but also to do some due diligence, because there are also some people out there selling things that either never arrive or are wrong. I think the final question before I wrap this up is, Graham, one for you, and possibly Steve, you may have a view on this as well. And this is definitely crystal ball gazing. Is there any extra insight on large gatherings, and if there's any likelihood on these being able to be given the go-ahead for later in the year? And if that were to happen, what potential controls may need to be put in place? I mean, it is a crystal ball question, but any insight you might be able to give on that?
from our perspective, before Steve comes in, we are giving consideration to what we can do, and it would be wrong of us not to plan to be able to deliver something if we were able to, because obviously the businesses in the city centre would want to be able to take advantage of it, but we would only do so if we felt it was absolutely safe to do so. So we'd work with the police and other partners about whether or not we were able to do that. But colleagues in the council from the culture area are looking at both larger scale plans and a series of smaller plans that may be able to be used instead in certain specific areas to try and make sure that we maximise safe footfall into the city centre to help drive the recovery.
Okay, Steve, is there anything you would like to add?
Well, I suppose initially, just to second it, we're absolutely awaiting some further guidance, but we're very supportive of plans to consider the future. I think on a slightly broader point, but linked, I just want to reassure everyone that's listening that from a licensing perspective and from a broader planning perspective, the police's view is that we will be starting as much as possible with yes, and then seeking to refine stuff that we think may cause a problem. So where we discuss things like licensing open space, in order to allow businesses to operate, and we want to be as supportive of that as possible. We may well take a view occasionally around adjustments required, but fundamentally we will be saying let's give it a try, and if it doesn't work, we'll step in then. That's the position we want to take, and I hope that we're able to maintain it.
Brilliant, thank you. Just before I do my concluding remarks, very old school, these are the websites, the government website, and I'm not sure if it's getting my camera, but that is the council's website where you can get all of this advice. That's all up live now, so if you need to do a screenshot, that's where to find it. And we will be putting those links on the NE1 website as well. You'll be able to find that on the council's website too. I think in conclusion, if I can, on behalf of all of us this afternoon, thank Graham, Lizzie and Steve very much indeed for giving up their extremely valuable time to come and talk to us. I hope you've all found that informative. I'm sorry we didn't get to everyone's question. Clearly, this is new for all of us. It is really important that we all collaborate and help one another as we're going through. And it's not a one size fits all. So we will be making, I think you should expect that we'll be learning from this and making adjustments as we go on. But I think the absolutely key thing is that as far as the city centre is concerned, that we are all of us able to work together to give out the message that the city centre, when it is able to open properly, everything is coordinated, that people and our staff, our employees feel safe to come and work in our stores and premises, that people feel safe come and use the city centre. And people will need a certain amount of coaxing, at least in the early days, to do all of that. And so making sure that we're all very joined up and collaborating is very, very important as we start to look forward to that. So there's a lot still to do. Thank you again to our panelists. Thank you again for listening. And if there are any specific questions that you didn't have answered, please send them to us at NE1 and we'll forward them to the council and try and get that information back for you. So on behalf of all of us again, panelists, those of you watching, thank you very, very much indeed, and have a great bank holiday afternoon, weekend. Thanks very much indeed. Bye-bye.